There's tons and tons of lore in Warcraft, from zones to main characters and big flashy cinematics, but even the NPCs you encounter have some sort of backstory. Today I'd like to tell you about some NPCs who have an interesting backstory. Over the expansions, so many things have happened. Characters coming and going, big noticeable NPCs who turn out to get a bigger role in the main story, and even more NPCs we just do 2 or 3 quests for and never talk to again. Some stick around for one expansion, some for multiple, but most NPCs are easily forgotten. Some of the following NPCs have backstories that go all the way back to the RTS Warcraft game of 1999 and are a part of the great history of Azeroth. Others are perhaps a memorial to real-life people, and some have incredible quest chains. Here is a selection of these NPCs. Let's talk about them. First up is Jeremiah Payson. Even though Arthas took Lordaeron, it was Sylvanas who eventually led it, giving the Forsaken a place to call home, known as the Undercity. Many Forsaken or Undead sought refuge here, but were not fighters themselves. Most commonly known as the Cockroach Vendor, Jeremiah is a prime example of the civilian victims in the war against the Scourge. His real last name is Fellstone, and you can find the remains of his once peaceful life in the Western Plaguelands, where the ghost of his sister still resides. This quest reveals Jeremiah's sad story, and is easy to miss unless you're traveling along the Fellstone field. Next is Zen Foulhoof. Zen is an NPC every Night Elf player should be familiar with. He tricks low-level players into aiding him with his evil schemes. He plots against the Night Elves, which makes the Night Elves angry, of course. You aiding him doesn't sit well with them either, so they explain what he's actually doing, and thus you end up tricking Zen instead. What's interesting is not his classic questline, but his future. In the Cataclysm expansion, he expands his plans and travels to Darkshore, and sets a number of plans into motion. It's a lot like the classic one, but on a much larger scale. The long quest chain in the current game doesn't end up with you tricking him again, but you end up taking his life instead. Next is Kalimdor of Darnassus. This NPC is quite a mystery, and you probably don't know who he is if you haven't heard of him. He doesn't offer any quests, doesn't buy or sell anything. So then who is he, and what makes him so special? He's actually an in-game tribute to a real-life person. Although he's a bit hidden in the city of Darnassus, which is already quiet due to it being so far away, hidden in the top corner of Kalimdor, he patrols around there, calmly. Before World of Warcraft launched, there were a lot of fan sites dedicated to the RTS franchise of Warcraft. One of the fan site's moderators, Mitchell, whose online name was Kalimdor, died in a car accident in 2003, and this is his tribute character. Next is Miranda the Hag. The eastern and western Plaguelands are broken, ruined and empty. Often when we walk around here we forget that this was actually the place where Arthas and his Scourge fought literally everyone. There are a lot of tragic stories in these lands if you take a minute to look around and take it all in. There are ruined, empty towns, broken families, ghosts and survivors like Miranda the Hag. She once had a respectable position, but fell on hard times. She used to be a powerful illusionist and was close to Tyrion Fordring. She also had contact with horde characters like Rexxar and Thrall. Her career, however, fell when she openly defied the ruling of the Silver Hand and was banished for her rebellion. You can learn a little more about her story if you take up her quests in the Western Plaguelands. Next is Zanzil the Outcast. In Classic WoW he's a minor villain in the Cape of Stranglethorn questline. In Retail WoW, he's a raid boss in Zul'Gurub, the 4th boss actually, instead of Jindo the Hexer. Anyway, players never really get to know about his dramatic backstory. If you do the quests and pay close attention, you can tell that he was exiled from either the Gurabashi or the Skullsplitter tribe, which explains why he's called Zanzil the Outcast. He was apparently thrown out for meddling with necromancy and something about a vile potion and Hakar. His conversation with the Shade of Hexar reveals something about throwing rocks and spitting, giving the impression his banishment wasn't a very pleasant one. Next is Archmage Arugul. Arugul wasn't just a guy whose experiments of wolves and men went wrong, where he became a prisoner of his own creations locked up in his tower. Details from the quest to kill him and the book in his library give some insight in his backstory. The Book of Ur, for example, was an old relic from the time when Arugul used to work together with the mage Ur. It was Ur's idea to experiment with the Worgen to create a powerful army to fight the Scourge. So he and Arugul decided to wake the fearsome Worgen, werewolf monsters created by the corrupted druids. The druids of the Fang were responsible for the creation of the Worgen and made sure they were uncontrollable. They indeed killed a lot of Scourge, but they also killed a lot of human residents in their blind fury, not distinguishing between victims they went on a rampage. One of the victims was Baron Silverlane in the nearby keep, spreading their rampage throughout Gilneas. Overcome with guilt, Arugul took over the keep and resides there with his Worgen, keeping them locked in, until you put him out of his misery. Next is Gunther Arcanus. During his lifetime, Gunther wasn't just a high-ranking mage of the Kirin Tor, he was a necromancer. A necromancer so powerful that the Scourge couldn't break his will, not even in death. Considering how important he is for the Forsaken and their connection with the Alliance through him, it is surprising that we don't hear more about him. Only low-level players in Tearsfall Glades are the only ones who ever run into him. Often mages and warlocks are the only ones who do the quest to bring him into the Forsaken, as the quest giver is close to their class trainers in Undercity. Next is Tabitha of Dustwallow Marsh. Warlocks sometimes come in contact with NPCs that walk a dark path. That's why warlocks get to know this character, but others rarely do. But even then, the info you get is scarce, but still very intriguing. She is a human mage, but is closely connected to the warlock Manara Voidrender in Ratchet. She is respected enough to not have one apprentice, but two. She also knows the impressive Summon Demon of the Orb spell. And finally, she appears to be an alchemist, and not a beginner one by the looks of the gear. Next is Nathanas Blightcaller. Nowadays he gets more of a spotlight position and more is known about him, but in Classic he was basically a nobody. You would never find him if it wasn't for the yellow dot on the minimap, and only Horde players got to know him, and he's actually a pretty funny guy. Alliance kill him as part of an elite quest and miss out on his clever words. The story goes back all the way to the Warcraft RTS games. He's not just the personal champion of the Forsaken Queen, Lady Sylvanas Windrunner. In life, she personally approved and trained him to be a Silvermoon Ranger. You can currently see him in the Caverns of Time Durnhold as his former self, Nathanas Maris. And finally, there is High Inquisitor Fairbanks. One of the secret bosses in Scarlet Monastery, Fairbanks is hidden in a panic room sort of chamber, hidden behind a movable wall and a torch lever in the cathedral wing. It turns out that in life, Fairbanks was involved with the creation of Ashbringer, the infamous sword, and survived the culling of Stratholme. He witnessed the betrayal of Renaud, who killed his own father with the Ashbringer, which made it corrupt. When he returned to Hearthglen to report what he saw, he was killed by the Knights of the Scarlet Crusade. Several Crusaders did believe him, however, and formed the Argent Dawn. The knights who killed him said he was showing signs of the plague and that's why they killed him, and it had nothing to do with the report according to them, which is why they threw him in a secret room to rot. But doesn't it seem strange that they would throw someone who had the plague in a secret room all by himself, where no one would ever find him? It seems strange to me, so perhaps they did kill him for the report after all, because they didn't want the information about Renaud's betrayal to come to light, or perhaps he came back to life as an undead because injustice was done to him. And those are 10 characters with interesting backstories. Subscribe if you want to see more, like if you want to support. Thank you for listening. Until the next time.